Hello, Marty, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on today. You said it's a foggy day there in California.
I'll save you the view out the window to see all the gray. But the June gloom here in the coastal Southern California is, traditional in the summertime. Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
it keeps it cooler.
brilliant. We've been having autumn in summer at the moment here in London, so not much better. So the first thing I want to ask you, Marty, is how did you get where you are today?
Like most people that find themselves in insurance, it feels like it was by accident. Yeah, I started my career in the military. When I left, my advisor, who's lifetime mentor, says, "Marty, you're an operations research, ninja. You find new data, you find deeper meaning, and if you go find giant piles of money, finding little slivers of improvement will give you a really good career." I took that advice and I went to healthcare, and unfortunately, healthcare in the 1990s looks a lot like it does today, but back then it was a ripe for mergers and acquisitions. And every place I went would either get merged, purged, or or somehow reorganized. And so after about a decade of having new bosses every other quarter, it seemed, it was like, where else could I go that has big money but better data? And as I was at one of my last roles, I found workers' compensation as the entryway from healthcare to casualty in PNC. And the and it's been 25 years of not looking back since then. PNC is much better behaved, way more contractual, has a lot of statutory complexity, but by and large, the data are better simply because people in the US aren't changing health plans every year on an annual basis as their employers shop for better cover or better
Yeah.
service or better price.
And what do you currently do?
So currently, I'm doing advisory work for a variety of companies looking at data analytics, AI strategies. And oftentimes, I'm labeled the chief grief officer because I'll come in and say, "Your data is really not as good as you think it is." Probably half of it is really great examples of your best decisioning, and the rest of it is garbage. But you don't really know which is which. Starting with all of your data is usually a terrible strategy. And that turns into from chief grief officer to chief causing grief officer, where it's now that you know what you need to change, let's go change something. And when it comes to pricing, it's an ever evolving race to more accurate pricing. And
Yeah.
I've been involved with several lines of insurance. I started in workers' compensation back with Risk Data Corporation, and there the idea was better micro reserving. So if you know your claim costs, then you should do a better job of knowing your pricing. And that unique American tradition called Thanksgiving is a is one of my favorite jokes around insurance, where once a year, usually around budget time or bonus time, the claims and underwriting get together and blame each other for a terrible year or slap each other on the back for a great year. It's a fun family table to be at, but the process of learning from your operational costs and indemnity payments to better improve your pricing accuracy, is a continuous and virtual, cycle of improvement. So when you look at the US market, the largest line by far is personal auto. I think it weighed in at the 2000 2024 first quarter at about $315 billion. Mind blowing.
Massive.
So
Mm.
at a pure loss ratio of 65% for personal auto, that means $100 billion in run the business and profitability. Just let that sink in. Wait a second.
Mhm.
$100 billion is a lot of responsibility for like non-indemnity payment. And so there, I think it's a noble cause for risk transfer. Without risk or risk transfer, people couldn't go about their daily lives. They couldn't make financial plans. They couldn't. expect to be fairly treated if there was, for God forbid, an accident, especially
Mm.
on the roadway. The idea of improving people's lives through risk transfer and improving risk transfer through better pricing is is like my happy place of using data analytics and advanced intelligence for understanding how can we do a better job of understanding the risk and understanding the value of the risk. And the two of those together are what makes, yeah, I think, risk transfer work.
That's right. Right is right. So you left healthcare and then arrived in casualty. What was your journey like through casualty insurance?
It's not been a straight line.
Mhm.
And some people say I've been more lucky than I've been good. And I'm okay with that characterization. Yeah, I started with Allianz and moved from Southern Cal to Northern Cal and worked at the Novato campus of Fireman's Fund. That institution isn't even in the market anymore. They've sold the brand, they sold the property. Allianz had bought Fireman's Fund, and then it spun it down and spun it off. So I think Ace and Chubb now own what's left of the branding, but very little paperwork left and no signage. They even gave the truck back, the old fire truck back to the historical society. So that was disappointing.
Mm.
Watching a 100-year-old company disappear from the market has been a bellwether for me of if you don't have pricing accurate, you're
Mhm.
really risking the whole enchilada.
Yeah.
And there might be a multiple ways of looking at it. I think the entertainment book did well and got sold off. Commercial mid-market did well, got sold off. Personal lines was doing okay, got sold off. A lot of
Mm.
high net worth, but their workers' compensation book really just got slaughtered in a California Oprah rating. And when you're running I don't know, a 240 loss ratio in a major commercial line,
Wow.
that's right. And that's my characterization. I don't know where the final thermometer landed on that whole
Mm.
process, but it was a lesson to be learned about watching what happens in the regulated market when open pricing comes to town and when claim cost controls relaxed. You can have pricing go down and claims go
Yeah.
up, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're in trouble. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I thought that was the only time that I'd never see that again. And lo and behold, COVID comes along and used car values enter, and everyone bets that cars go down in value. And all
Yeah.
of a sudden, cars became popular because there's no new cars coming out, so all the new
Yeah.
used cars are being bought, and that inflection of change in value at risk totally blew up the personal auto market in the U.S., probably globally, just because the cost of replacing, a like kind and quality vehicle could be 50% more than you expected or more. And that's a shock to the system. And when
Mm.
your pricing systems, like here in the US, are tied to an embedded evaluation structure, you don't have the resilience to be mark to market. And it's weird. It's like the only line that's like that. Homeowners changed to coverage A back in the 90s after Hurricane Andrew. Scheduled valuable possessions have always been that way. Even agreed value for risk in commercial auto is like an old thing. So anyway, not to get too digressed, but the once in a lifetime punch in the face happened twice for me. Once in unregulated California workers comp and then once in COVID surprise used car values. And but between those two goalposts of my career, in between, it's been a journey of predictive analytics. I was one of the first people to bring in text analytics to insurance. And you can see everywhere you go now,
Mhm.
text is data, pictures are
Yeah.
data, geospatial is data. That type of analytical framework was what I brought with me from the military, where I was in the science labs, helping to instrument the fighter cockpits of the future and all the man machine, human machine interfaces and pilot and safety systems. Now we have driver safety systems. Spoiler alert for that one. Having better situational awareness around what's happening outside the vehicle is the only thing that matters. You know, we had spent billions of dollars trying to give people information about how the machine is working. And it's, they don't, that's not necessary to not hit stuff.
Yeah.
And for the most part, at least with a vehicle, you're you're not stressing it. It's it's doing 50, 60 miles an hour. It comes to a slow, calm stop. It comes to maybe a fast acceleration, but by and large, you're in a 2D world operating on a level plane with engineered surfaces. No big surprises that cars should should stay functioning. So back to pricing, when you think about the average household in America being one of 120 million households with either one, two, or three cars or more, that means that you could have three, four, $5,000 of auto insurance or more expenses, depending on how many drivers in the household. So
Yeah.
it's a real relevant thing for everyone, and it's one of the only things you have to purchase. Yeah, it's like people talk about death, taxes, and auto insurance.
I'm going to remember that. That's a
It's
good
a
one.
compulsory line.
Yeah, it is. You have to. That's a good one. S- You mentioned the increase in the used car prices, and that has caused a problem here in the UK as well. We've had quite heavy auto insurance inflation, but we've also had issues where customers have received lower amounts on write-offs on losing their vehicles because many people say it's because the tables and the information that we use is not actually keeping up to date with what's happening in the real world.
Isn't that a shame that you could probably Google on your phone the value of your car and get a better spot estimate of what someone down the street would pay for it than a table and a system or a book or a mainframe that was loaded a year ago using two
Yeah.
year ago rates with a factor for deprecation. So there's a lot on the table still to clean up what's available in the real time world versus the mainframe world, looking at tables and an archaic pricing system. So there is a lot of tradition that was built in the US maybe in the 40s and 50s when there was 25 million cars and no one had enough credibility to really know what's going on, and there really wasn't computers or internet. Now that's not true. The list price of a vehicle for sale is pretty close to the sale price these days. Gone are the days where we had to enforce mandatory window stickers because people didn't know what they were getting under
Mhm.
the hood without a
Mhm.
label that says, here are the features that are on this specific vehicle. And in what early 80s, 1981, they started to put the vehicle identification number, like your cell phone MEID or any other type of unique product identifier. Now, when they build it from the factory, exactly what the factory put on it.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
and you can price that in the market. So I'd say that that type of build sheet level data when you use your phone and the preview view of who's calling, the telephone company always knew who that was.
Yeah.
They just made it available to you for you to view it. So, and they
Yeah.
call it caller ID.
Yeah.
So with a vehicle ID, you can actually get the features, the values, maybe even the current location, all sorts of things you can know. But the value of vehicle is just a characteristic. Does it
Mm.
have a big engine or a small engine?
Yeah, absolutely. And Marty, what would you say is your mission for insurance pricing?
Uh, First, get back to work. I left JD Power as they were reorging and getting ready for their next big transaction about this time last year. So it's been a great, what do you call it, a year at sea. I've traveled the world. I've done some advisory work, but
Mhm.
I'm swimming back to shore going, I'm still young enough to have a job. So whether it's advice or real job, the idea of getting back to pricing or claims or both, like that table that says, you know, you need to price to your expenses, and you need to manage your expenses the real world. And that's the big thing. So I think my future is have pricing be more reflective of the real world. Because in a cost plus system of compulsory ownership of vehicle liability insurance, there's a there's not a lot of incentive to keep the cost down.
Yeah.
There is more incentive to keep alignment, but the idea that the claim system is tied to real world claims costs and
Mhm.
market prices, and underwriting can be too, and that the structure of the contract can have more accuracy, as we've proven with real books of business at the most recent rate making conference back in March.
Yeah.
We took the theory, talked about how we got to where we were in rate making. We took real data with Willis Towers Watson at the helm with one of their customer portfolio books of business. And when we applied the data for pricing in time with the market value, they were able to show dramatically what's going on with the loss cost curves of used value, and how does that fit with the future of pricing. And I think for a lot of people, the big surprise was before the COVID shock to the world system, cost of vehicles really behave differently than they are
Mhm.
behaving right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now it's 2024. And 3 years ago was when a lot of the crazy stuff in the world was happening with COVID. That's the same time, almost to the month, that plants shut down, fleets stopped leasing, all sorts of production and supply issues became material. And now we're going into the what I'll call the ghost fleet era, where
Yeah.
all those cars not produced are also now not available in the used car market. And
Yes.
typically,
Yeah.
the 3 year release return is like the
Mhm.
most desirable used vehicle because it had to be held under maintenance. It was
Mhm.
under a financial contract. People managed the return of it, and they prepped it and warranted it almost, yeah, as a service as they brought it back to market. So with millions of those not available starting now and running for the next 3 year, 2 year, 1 year lease anniversaries, it's going to put a lot of pressure on used car values to come. While it's been coming down recently, it went up 50%, and now it's going to leak down and then maybe even hold on because of that ghost fleet effect. I'd like to say we don't need to worry about it for pricing. Everybody just go back to work, enjoy the profits that are coming through from the large freight increases. But I'm for the sake of the industry and my future mission, don't do that. It's instead work a little harder with that $100 billion of windfall, and put some expense pressure on understanding the accuracy of the value at risk.
Yeah. There's a lack of supply of cars moving through the system, isn't there?
Yeah, and if you did have a lease, a lot of people are just buying them out now because they can hold on to what they know
Mhm.
versus having to go to market in a still turbulent area. Now, used car supply is getting better, but not everyone wants the used car or can afford the
Mhm.
used car.
Mm.
There's some households
Absolutely.
there's some households in America that have never and will never buy a new car. Their budget's going to be 10, 20,000, not 30, 50,000.
And I suppose EVs are pushing those prices up as well.
Yeah, for a minute, and now they're falling. So the kind of the only silver lining to the EV competition is even Teslas are getting cheaper. What that means for total losses of EVs, though, is pretty interesting. When everything was high, total losses were fewer because the threshold for a total loss calculation at 80% of fair market value would pay for this much damage to be repaired. As the value went up, the claims costs looked like they went up. Didn't really happen.
Yeah,
It's
it
just
did.
the underlying value
Mm.
at risk went up. And
Yeah.
so the shadow of payment and repairability got wider. Now, as cars are dropping in value, especially EV cars, that's being compressed and the total loss threshold getting lower. You'll see more totals where I could just get you a new car that's an EV
Yeah.
instead of replacing what you have. And so that's going to be a weird dynamic that it's not obvious. If all you did was look at loss cost to set your prices, you miss the subtleties of the value at risk in the loss costs. And as people are being told, raise your deductibles to save money, that just takes away the lower tail of
Yeah.
claims. So
Mm.
even if you only did that, the average claim cost goes up.
Yes. That's right.
And,
Yeah.
and, and then as your vehicles get more valuable, then you start to repair a few more, your claim costs go up. So
Mm.
now maybe the damage isn't any more severe than it used to be, but your costs look that way. And if you've got inflation for labor sprinkled on top, then if it takes more hours to do the work, more hours times more pay per hour, that goes on too. So it looks like a death spiral or a happy dream for lost cost traced business because you're just going to multiply your loss cost times a factor to get another factor to get your rate, and rates just keep going up. So it's insidious that you tell people take more risk and pay less for your rate. But when you do that, loss costs inch up, and when your car gets more valuable, your loss costs get up. And
Yeah.
you know what you shouldn't do is cancel your collision on a vehicle that's holding its value, because if it's actually worth 4,000 or 10,000, maybe you don't want to go bare on collision coverage because that's a pretty big financial shock.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is a big shock. And what would you say is your vision for the future of insurance pricing?
I think the risk of unit one is the idea of getting the most accurate price at the vehicle household level, where
Yeah.
how it's driven, where it's driven, why it's driven, when it's driven is all more transparent in terms of its risk envelope. And if you can't do anything besides go to work and have an awful commute, then that's your risk. And if you behave better in that risk stream, you should still be rewarded with a better operating rate. But if you've got more flexibility and you can choose when you drive and you don't drive much, that observability is a game changer environment. And we're seeing the first decade of that with usage-based insurance and telematics.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a little creepy with people knowing where you are, when you are, who'd you meet, or where'd you go. But
Mhm.
your phone already does that.
Yeah, it does.
So
Yeah, that's the
this is
thing.
why
Yeah.
companies are using your phone data to infer
Mhm.
all that. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm, uh, I'm at one hand a little curious, and on the other hand, how much can I save?
Yeah. I mean, smartwatches as well are doing the same thing. All these devices already know where we are and are sending that information back. But it's interesting how people are trusting their phone companies, but feeling nervous about insurance companies.
And it's if you went back to the 90s when credit scoring came in, it was
Mm.
like, what? You're going to use credit scoring in my auto insurance? It's like,
Yeah.
but we've been using it for making loan decisions for 30 years before that. It's like, oh, well, never mind. It's like, oh, and we use it to help you get your phone loan. You've
Yeah.
got a $1,000 new handset, whatever they're called these days. Some are even more expensive than
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah, they really are. Yeah.
so it is curious that when a consumer goes, "Wait, what? You're doing that?" That the information when used in a different way becomes feeling of ungoverned. And
Yeah.
while you never seen what your smartphone or your smartwatch or your smart car could really do, for some reason, the new of vehicle information seems more creepy than the comfortable new of everything else.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. That's a very valid point. So, Marty, thanks ever so much for being on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would. I would encourage all the generations who probably will never hear this, but maybe hear about something like this. Say insurance is the dullest granddaddy type of industry around, but it's complex, it's rich, it's meaningful to the everyday lives of every person. And
Yeah.
risk transfer is critical to making the economy work and making everyone's life more livable. I'd say if you hadn't thought of insurance as a career, uh, think again.
Mhm. I would agree with that. It's an ever ongoing challenge and certainly keeps us all busy and interested.
Yeah, and even when we make a mistake, the the necessity of having insurance to make the world work gives
Yeah.
us a chance to come back and do it better tomorrow.
Yes, it definitely does. Thanks ever so much for being on the show today, Marty. You have a good rest of your day.
You too, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks for being on. Bye bye.